First of all, Garrison, thank you very much for your talk on the Performance MDT webinar. If you could give a brief summary of your talk for those that weren't able to tune in, that'd be great, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve, for having me back on, and what a great conference you hosted. My talk was sort of based on my PhD project, which is looking at some of the environmental factors that MLS players and elite athletes in general have to deal with, and how they respond to them from a training load and objective load standpoint, and from a subjective load standpoint with differential RPE and wellness. So in the talk, I took time to talk about sort of the where the problem came from, and sort of why we felt this was an important project for applied sports scientists. And then we talked about some of the different metrics that we've discovered and learned a little bit more about during training and playing in heat, training and playing in altitude, and then the weird circumstances in the MLS with so much travel of dealing with flight and then dealing with jet lag.
Okay,
Nice.
Garrison.
So I've got question one. I'm guessing this is obviously based off what you've just said, but is probably a popular one when it comes to guys in the MLS. But how do you try and or the US in general, actually, no matter what sport you play, but how do you try and combat the effects of travel on your players within season?
Yeah, I think it's sort of the first part of it is just creating a well-rounded program and helping the athletes be prepared for the stresses we know they're going to incur. There's still a lot of question marks about how much stress or how much load heat and travel may have on the athlete's body. What we learned from a lot of our research is there is an effect, and there's sort of some equivalencies between your hardest training session and changes in wellness and flying, for instance. So our first spot is like just taking the time to create a really well-rounded program where players are prepared for the stresses and prepared to sort of deal with the difficulties they're going to incur. From there, then we already know travel is a part of everyone's schedule. So it's alleviating that as much as possible. And I think the biggest piece that we're seeing in all the different environmental issues is hydration. When we talk about heat, when we talk about flying, when we talk about cold, the hydration piece is a really important part of it. And so hammering that home and really helping athletes understand the importance of that has been one of our biggest strategies.
Cool. Cheers for that, Garrison. So the second question we've got is a two-parter, really. So what are the main items you take with you when you travel? And like, do you have to stay away for weeks sometimes, like within the season as well?
Yeah, so I'll take the first one first. And the main items that we talk about, the hydration one's, again, a big piece of it. We've met with the company, and we haven't fully launched it at our club, but I've experimented it with myself a little bit, and we'll try and push it a little bit harder. And I know some other guys have some other strategies, but there's a company called ERW, and they create these little flight packs. And then they're really nice flavored, and they sort of help with the nutrition and the timing side of helping with jet lag. But as I mentioned in my talk, the cabin of an airplane is about the same dryness as the Sahara Desert. And so that hydration piece is really difficult one to combat. And with this ERW product, they give you a really easy, like soft water bottle. And so when it's not full, it takes up no space at all. It'll take up less than like a portable mouse in your backpack. So it's a really easy way to sort of get the hydration needs that you have. And then also following some of the nutrition guidelines that are coming out on nutrition and travel and nutrition time zone shifting. So that's been a cool product that we've messed with a little bit. But just the hydration in general is the really important piece. And I think that's the most important item that we would pack for any of our travel situations. On to the second part, do we stay away for weeks at times? It's not as frequent as you would expect with as big as the country as we have. Over the last couple of years, we've only had a couple of trips where we've stayed away for more than maybe 3 days at a time. And what happens a lot of times in the MLS is you're making a decision between optimal and your financial situation, and also dealing with commercial airlines, because we fly commercial flights almost everywhere. And that's just recently changed. And with COVID-19, we haven't gotten to experience the fun of our new collective bargaining agreement, sort of like what Joe talked about, where there's more charter flights available. So we've always had to deal with commercial airlines and their flight schedules, which has been difficult in our training and planning process. So a lot of times we end up coming back to our home city, even if we have like a Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday away stretch. It's usually easier to do a lot of our rehab and our recovery back in our home city than it is to sort of fly and try and make a makeshift camp.
So third question from me. So as part of your PhD, what are the main studies that you're looking at? So a bit of an overview of your PhD would be great.
Sure. So the first paper started out, we wanted to develop new metrics. And what we found was actually there was some really interesting phenomenon within our data when we took environmental factors out of it. So we're just looking at our training data and our game data. And what we saw was our wellness and our differential RPE actually responded differently in the two phases of the season. So preseason and in-season times. And so the first paper really just talks about the within player correlations between a wellness score and some of our training load metrics. The second sort of part of that paper is we dove in and tried to develop or tried to figure out what are the important metrics. A lot of the talks throughout the day were sort of mentioning the need to refine the number of metrics that we're utilizing and looking at. And this is something that we try to do with principal component analysis and sort of teasing through and figure out what are the important metrics. So that's paper one. That one's almost packaged up. Hopefully that's coming out soon. Everyone's got a couple of, probably one more review from each of the advisors, and then we'll try and send it out. The second one is a case study, and you saw some of the data from it on altitude, where we're just looking at these situations now, pulling some of these metrics in and comparing sea level and altitude training, and how do players respond in wellness situations, how do they respond in training load situations, how do they respond in differential RPE. From there, a paper we felt was really important is to look back sort of historically and do a systematic review on what has been studied with wellness and subjective measures in terms of environmental conditions. Are there papers out there? Are there not? What are they saying? I know Sean's talk was really interesting to me, Sean McLaren, about sort of his feeling and his research on wellness surveys. And I was a little surprised that he mentioned that they may not be as powerful as we may give them credit for in the applied world. So I'm excited to go through the systematic review myself and sort of see what they're having to say about the environmental conditions. From there, I think we're going to take a turn towards maybe heat, which is another important part of the MLS landscape, where we're dealing with hot temperatures in Chicago during the summer, in Florida during the summer, in Philadelphia during the summer, and really giving some applied advice to the practitioner. And that was the main idea behind all of it, was we wanted to create a project that was really really easily utilized by the practitioner. And so all of our decision making has been sort of guided by that idea.
Yes. Thank you, Rich. And I suppose it sounds like you've done a lot for the PhD, which is a big task, and this leads on to the last question, really. Like, how have you found balancing work life, PhD life, and family life?
I've been really lucky, Steve, and I'm sure you know this as well. Working in the applied environment, we get sort of lucky with our data collection is also our job. So it doesn't really feel like you're having to devote a ton of time to your PhD during that period. So that's where I've been over the last couple of years, is like really trying to focus on collecting this data and making it look right and ensuring that it's high quality. Now that we're sort of past the major data collection phase and now we're into the writing, I'm finding it's a little more difficult. Now I really have to schedule in the time to sit down and have a think and sit down and review a paper, make sure I'm reading. So it's taken a little bit of shift. I don't want to say that COVID-19 is a good thing, but COVID-19 has been a really good thing for my PhD. because I've had a ton of time to sit down and think and have some time to really look at some of the papers that I want to review and review some of the papers that we're trying to publish and make sure that they're quality enough for my standards.
Yeah. No, again, it's what I think one of the most difficult things as a practitioner doing a PhD is actually that writing time. Normally,
Yes.
the time off that everyone gets is the off season. You just spend it writing and writing and writing because it's consistent. So it's nice to see you making the most of a bad situation now. So, if anyone's got any more questions, is there anywhere where they can reach you, Garrison?
Yeah, absolutely. I know my Twitter blew up a little bit right after the talk, but if you didn't get that, my Twitter handle is @Garrison Draper. And then you can always email me. My email is gdraper@philadelphiaunion.com.
Thanks for your time again, Garrison. Really appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers. Appreciate that, Garrison.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll edit out the chat first of all, and then just basically do all that. But no, really good. Thank you very much for that. Did you have quite a lot of people messaging you on Twitter other than internships and that?
I've had a few. There's probably 3 or 4 internships, but then there were a lot of really good questions. Like there were a couple of guys from within like the women's side that have emailed me, and I'm in the United States. The women's league is like it's the wild, wild west. Like
Oh, really?
they have super low standards, and so like listening to some of their stories and them talking about travel and like. Not all of them are in huge cities. So like they're flying from like a regional airport to an international airport to the city that they need to go to, or taking a 4-hour bus ride to the nearest international airport to fly to their next city. So like it's tough. And they were asking me and I said, yeah, good luck. Like, that's a tough one.
Yeah, but it's incredible really. Like you think about like for us like 3-hour like train journey is a long
we just don't get the
commute.
scale really, do we here?
No.
You don't really understand it until you hop on your first like for me the mind-blowing one was flying from Philadelphia to LA. It's a 6.5-hour flight. And when I was explaining that to one of our players the first time, he's from Norway. And his flight from Newark, New Jersey to Oslo was 5 hours.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I could fly home, but we're going to fly a match and we're only going to be there for a day. So yeah, exactly right. So it's an interesting conversation to have. And that's where the guys like the new guys in the league, like some of our foreign guys, they don't understand it and they really struggle. And you can see it in the wellness scores are so interesting for their first year because they're like straight down lines comparing like right after a flight to like our normal American guys. Like our captain Alejandro Bedoya is a U.S. national team player. He's played in the United States for a long time. And he's just like, it's another day. Like he doesn't really change from flight to flight.
Yeah, just part of it. Like, has Matt seen that quite a lot with the referees as well, with like regards to wellness, or have you not?
We haven't gotten to talk about it too much. So Matt was on my advisory group, and then when he took that job, he had to step away, and he's been so busy since he took the role that we haven't really gotten to talk. He's like, we've texted back and forth a little bit. Because what he's trying to do is sort of what you guys did in the UK with referees, where there's sort of like the different local like rehab centers.
Yeah.
And so that's what he's trying to do now, and he wants to utilize some of our resources in Philadelphia. So we've talked about that a little bit, but we haven't had just like a proper chat. And he's about as close as he could get to me in the United States, he lives in Hoboken, New Jersey, which is an hour and 15 minutes away. But it's still like, feels like you're across the ocean.
So yeah, because to do that in the States, there's nowhere really local, is there?
No, and all the referees live all across the country too. Like the guy who won the referee of the year lives in Seattle. And so for Matt and him to coordinate, like there's a 3-hour time zone difference and a 5-hour flight between them. So it's sort of a difficult one to really do. So he's trying to set those up.
So cool. Right. Well, thank you again, Garrison. And I'm conscious that you'll probably have some lovely PhD writing to do right now.